computer. Good evening, Don. How are you?
Well, I'm doing very well, thank you. Good evening to you too, and thanks for the invitation to share some thoughts with you tonight.
Yes, I'm really excited to be here, everyone from Trinity, with um, Dr. Don Taylor, who is the Professor Emeritus of Communications at California State University in Sacramento and the former Assistant Vice President for Academic Affairs there, and one of our beloved vergers. So it's wonderful to see you, and thank you for agreeing to do this.
Well, again, thank you for the invitation. Always a pleasure to be part of what's going on at Trinity. And this is an initiative you're doing, and I'm glad to be part of it.
Thank you. So I wanted to talk to you, Don, because it's Black History Month, and I am aware that both of us are bicultural. So maybe you're tricultural, I'm not sure. But I've lived in London, in England, and I've lived in America now as a white man. And you have lived in Freetown, London, and here as a person of color. And I'm interested in what that perspective gives. So if I just share one thing, I grew up not really thinking of England as being particularly racist. But after moving to America and spending time here and seeing race in a different light here, I saw racism more clearly in America than I did in England because it was not my culture. And then after having been here and done some work on that, I went back to England, and my experience was to see it as a place with great racial disparities, with great race problems. And it was because I was looking at it from outside of that culture. And I'm fascinated to know what it's like for you to have been a multicultural international person with Freetown, England, and the United States in your background, and what that's taught you about the experience of being a Black man in the world.
Well, that's quite a large portfolio there. That's quite a large portfolio there. Yes. So yes, I like you correctly say, I was born in Freetown, Sierra Leone, a former British colony. And then my dad was in the diplomatic service, and so he was transferred to the United Kingdom, to London. So I had an opportunity to grow up in London. We were the embassy children, if you like. And at that point, you know, I'm not sure I was alert to any issues of race relations. I went to school, and I participated in the school orchestra. I was playing the violin. I remember we did a performance one time at Covent Garden Royal Opera House, where Her Majesty the Queen Mother, the late Elizabeth, attended, and always remember shaking her hands and things like that. So it seemed okay, and probably it seemed okay because I was coming from a colonial experience where I happened to be from an ethnic group in Sierra Leone that's a direct descendant of the slaves who returned to settle in West Africa, notably in Freetown and Monrovia, Liberia. And so, you know, being around white people had happened, and it had happened from, if you like, from a position of near equality. I wouldn't call it equal, but you know, we lived an upper middle class life, you know, and I didn't see any particular challenges there, especially when I was there as a child with my parents. I returned home, of course, when my dad tour of duty to England ended. And then after I completed high school, I returned back to the United Kingdom for my college education.
Okay.
And now I go as an adult, and I begin to see things that probably I didn't think existed.
Right.
And that's where I begin to run into notions about differences. Um, Probably the most stark experience that I always remember, that I tell people about, not because it was it doesn't happen to other people, but for me it was the first time of recognition that I was Black.
Right.
It really tore into me.
Mhm.
And that was when I think at this time, I can't remember if I was in Sheffield or Leeds. My bachelor's degree was from Sheffield, my master's from Leeds. But we came to London very frequently because, we have friends there. Um, like I said, Sierra Leone is a former British colony, so Sierra Leoneans go to London quite a bit. It's like their other home. And so, a lot of folks I went to school with were there. And so weekend trips to London was fairly commonplace. And I remember this particular weekend, we just had my daughter. She was very, very young, a baby, a toddler. And we were going to London for the weekend from, I think it was Leeds, but it could have been Sheffield.
Mhm.
And I made the reservation for the hotel on the phone. And usually we stay with our friends and relatives, but something adventurous in me that day led me to say to my wife Esther, I said, you know what? We're always going to hang out with friends when we go to London. Let's get a hotel.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that? Let's get a hotel, do our own thing, go out and do what we want to do, go visit our friends,
Yeah.
go eat with them, but come back and take our own pace. And I got a reservation at a hotel that I called, and we we I think I rented a car. We went down to London. We went to the hotel. Um, if I remember, I think it was in Earl Scott, or somewhere like that.
Mhm.
And I showed up at the door, and I went into the desk to check in, and and I said, "This is Donald Taylor. I have a reservation with you for 3 nights, blah blah blah." And she looked at me and she said, "Donald Taylor has already checked in." I said, "No, you have it wrong. Donald Taylor has not checked in. I am the one who spoke to you. I spoke to you 3 days ago. I told you what day I was arriving, what time I was arriving.
Right.
And here I am with my wife and an infant daughter. And this is where I have made a reservation. Listen, listen, man, I told you that Donald Taylor has checked in. I don't have two Donald Taylors." I said, "But you gave me a reservation number. This is the reservation number. I'm going to ask you to leave. Donald Taylor has checked in."
Oh,
And this was the very first time in my life that I felt that sense of outright rejection,
yeah.
because I knew I was Donald Taylor. I knew I spoke to her on the phone.
Yeah.
But for some reason, she didn't associate the voice that spoke to her as a Black person. For
Yeah.
some reason, she didn't. Maybe back in those days, I had the proper Oxbridge accent. Who knows? But she probably
Still do.
she probably well, she didn't expect that. And now the
Yeah.
problem wasn't over because I didn't want to call my friends and tell them that we had been rejected at a hotel.
Yeah.
And so we started looking. We started looking, driving around, and I ended up at a bed and breakfast someplace. And they accepted me.
Yeah.
And they accepted me. And I said, thank God they accepted. So we checked in, my wife and I and the baby, we checked in, went up there. And then my wife said, it's kind of, I'm tired with all this hassle and all this stuff. can we just do room service today and let them bring the food? And I said, sure,
Yeah.
let me order the food. Oh my God.
Really?
Oh my God. I ordered the food, and the person who answered the phone on the other end, who the hell do you think you are? You better come down here and get your own food. What the hell? And all kinds of swear words and cuss words and all that. I said, what's
Yeah.
going on here? You know, and I told Esther what was going on, and she said, I told you we should have gone to Janet. This is a friend, you
Yeah.
know. Now we can't even eat.
Yeah.
Um, and so to cut a long story short, because this will take the whole night, I went downstairs and I said, I don't understand why you have room service and I have funds to pay for it, and you would call me up on the phone.
Mhm.
And the guy said to me, oh, you're paying for yourself? I said, yes. And he said, oh, I thought you were one of those people that the London borough sent in because you didn't have somewhere to stay.
Mhm.
So he thought I was homeless. I was coming in to live on the largesse of taxpayers,
Yeah.
and that I should get up and go get my own food, and I'm not supposed to have that. And I told him, I am a paying guest. I don't know if this hotel or this bed and breakfast is where people who are having problems come to. I was just looking for somewhere to sleep, you
Yeah.
know. And he apologized. He apologized and asked me what I wanted. But at that point, my wife said, I don't eat. She said, I'm not going to eat here,
Yeah.
you know. And we called our friends, and they came and took our daughter away. They said, we're going to feed her.
Yeah.
You guys figure out what you're going to do. And, you know, the following morning we checked out and went to live with the people who were saying we were not going to bother, you know.
That's just
This happened in London. This happened in London, a
yeah.
place I grew up in partly as a child,
Yeah.
a place I yearned to go back to as an adult
Yeah.
to do my university education. And I have never forgotten that.
Yeah.
And so because of that experience there, I began to look at the organization of British society at the time.
Yeah.
How many, how many, how many of my type were in top positions?
Mhm.
How many of them had been elected to parliament?
Right.
How many of them were leading in the military? How many of them were heading universities? How many of them were principal barristers and solicitors?
Yeah.
And I began to see an emptiness. And I began to ask myself, is this a place for me?
Yeah.
When I get my bachelor's degree and my master's degree, is this a place for me?
Yeah.
There seems to be a glass ceiling. There seems to be a place to which I can go no more. And so, upon graduation with my master's degree, I went back to Sierra Leone, to Freetown.
Yeah.
Now, I have not had that direct experience in the United States,
You haven't?
but I have seen to be rejected at a hotel.
Yeah.
That has not happened yet.
Yeah.
It could,
Okay.
but it hasn't happened yet.
Because then after some
I mean,
time, sorry, carry on.
go right ahead.
I was going to say,
No,
after
please.
some time in Sierra Leone, you relocated here, where you did more academic study and started on an academic track. So you've now experienced for, is it three decades, life in the US, or is it longer?
Yeah.
And
As of tonight, it's more than 3 decades, because I came to Sacramento State in the fall of 1990
okay,
with a brand new minted PhD. So last 2020, August of 2020, I was 30 years in Sacramento. But
wow.
don't forget, I spent 5 years in Kent, Ohio.
Okay. So what's the experience?
And I had done some trips. I had done some trips and other
Okay.
activities, like in Minneapolis. I spent some time. I spent a year at the Hubert Humphrey Institute of Public
Okay.
Affairs in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I visited Atlanta, everywhere. I've been,
Yeah.
So yeah.
What's your experience of being in America then, as a person of color? You've not been turned away from a hotel, and has it felt very different to navigate? Earlier on when we were talking, just before we started recording the conversation, you were saying that you're aware that the experience that you've had is not the same as the experience of every person of color in America.
Or every Black person, for that
Yeah.
matter.
Yes.
Because we have to understand that the Black experience has certain fundamentals to it, like discrimination, being
Yeah.
treated differently, and stuff like that. That happens across the board writ large. But we also have to understand that the experiences of a Black immigrant coming, say, for example, from West Africa,
Right.
as I did, from a native-born African American, is different.
Yeah.
I have been shaped in my upbringing by colonialism and what goes on in a colonial experience and the influence of the colonial regime, and in my case, the British influence for 200 years or what. And then you come and bump into another Black person who has been shaped by an experience of slavery,
Yeah.
and the horrors of slavery, of the Black experience, of not being allowed to sit in the same section of a bus or on the train, or not being allowed to go into the same entrance to a department store, or having park benches for whites only or Blacks only. All of those experiences shape the Black experience of the native-born African American, which is, in some instances, not the case with the native-born African, unless, of course, we're talking about South Africa, Zimbabwe, and
Yeah.
some of those places that were active in apartheid and that kind of thing. And so it will be faulty to make the assumption that because these two people are Black, one is from Africa, one is native-born African American, therefore they share the same experiences. They don't. And that could lead to misunderstanding sometimes.
Yeah.
And people become concerned. Why is it these are two Black people? Why don't they understand each other? Well, at some basic level, we understand that we've had similar experiences, but also we've had some very significant different experiences that can shape language, discourse, our approach to things, and so forth. And I think that is worthy of note. But there are some things that unite us. There are some things that unite us in terms of our lived experience, in terms of the Black experience in the United States. I mean, if a police officer was to stop me, I would expect the same kind of behavior as if I was a native-born African American. If I go to the mall and I enter, a large department store, and I have a feeling that I'm being followed, I expect a native-born African American is having the same kind of experience. If I sit in the mall on a bench and there were other people, perhaps white people sitting there, that they might get up and leave is something I would expect. And the same thing I think an African American native born would expect. So there are some things that we would experience that's the same because we are Black. But then there are some assumptions that we should be careful to make simply because we are Black, because there could be some differences based on the Black experience.
What you're describing to me is interesting in many different ways, but you're describing the Black experience as just a matter of fact reality of people's lived experience in America if they are Black, that I think many people with white skin like me don't have a conception of. Like, this is just a given. It's just your experience of walking into a mall, of encountering a police officer, of just being in the world will be influenced by this in a way that I just don't live with. I can walk anywhere, I can move anywhere, and I don't have that sense of foreboding or that sense of what might happen in this set of circumstances. And that's something that you live with, take for granted, and have to work with. It's like an extra weight you have to carry.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a very heavy burden that Black people, whether or not they're immigrants or native-born African Americans, it's something they have to carry, because they have to be alert to the environment. You have to teach your children and grandchildren certain behaviors that would be normal for other people, but would be problematic for them. Now, I remember when some guy was shot or something because he had a hood on. In I can't remember the exact story. And my grandson was going to go to the mall, and he bought these sweatsuits, these tracksuits that have a hood on it. And I said to him, "You can't go to the mall with that." And he said, "Why not?" I said, "Because you're Black. You could get into trouble if something goes there, you know." And he understood, but he didn't like it. Yeah. Because he'd seen it in the news. He knows what's going on. Yeah. But that extra layer of sensitivity has to be there. Yeah. Because people are going to approach you with all kinds of suspicion, with all kinds of preconceived biases. Yeah. That's how they're going to approach you, and you've got to be alert to that. Yeah. You know, you've got to be aware of that. You know, it's okay that I know that if I go into a crowded elevator, you know, people are going to try to squeeze away from me, you know, or it's okay. I'm accustomed to that. In fact, I can tell you that sometimes, you know, like in my student days, when I didn't have a car and I would take the bus, I really want to stretch out on the bus. I'm going to go take that open seat because I know nobody else is going to come sit there. And I'm not upset about that. I'm getting to have elbow room. I'm fine with that, you know. So you get to live with it because it is the nature of things. That's what it is.
You're not upset about
it. Black History Month is an opportunity for us to be aware of these, to develop a notion out there that we need to walk in the other person's shoes, to bring to them, you know, what it is to be aware of the difficulties and challenges of living in a multiracial, multicultural society. It is not easy to manage diversity. It is not. We all have different languages, different beliefs, different food system, different clothing, you know, all of those things. And we live in what the German philosopher may have called a Gesellschaft, you know, in an urban, individualized, dislocated mass. You know, everybody is we are all there, but we're not there. Yeah. You know, there's lack of trust. You know, we don't know our neighbors and things like that. And then on top of that, you're Black. Yeah. So it makes it a little bit more difficult.
You're describing as commonplace things that you have to live with that I don't dream of living with, that I don't walk through my day thinking about. I wonder if there's anything else that you would like us to think about in relation to Black History Month. If there's anything else that this month might bring to mind that you would share. You've talked about the idea of walking in somebody else's shoes and empathy for the other, but is there something else you'd like to leave us with as a thought?
Well, one of the things that I take from Black History Month, which I think it's really important that we have it, is to be able, as much as we speak to the horrors of the past and the horrors that we experience even now. Trinity asked me to speak um, when we had that problem in Minneapolis with with the kneeling death, um, and I gave an address at the service of healing that night, and I said, we still can't breathe.
Mhm.
We still cannot breathe. There are so many ways in which the knee is on the neck
Mhm.
of Black people,
Mhm.
not just in the United States, but in many societies around the world that have a dominant white culture. It's in education, in
Mhm.
terms of the schooling, in healthcare, in terms of the disparity. It's in housing, you know, it's in the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
It's everywhere, you know. It is so pervasive,
Yeah.
but yet it's like people don't see it, but
Yeah.
it's there. And Black History Month gets us to be reminded about what Martin Luther King referred to as urgency of
Mhm.
now. To be, we got to be aware of these things.
Yeah.
We got to recognize that we're all children of God.
Mhm.
That we happen to have color differences, but we have hearts and minds, and we can love our neighbor as ourselves, as Christ taught us. And Black History Month enables me to 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 bring that awareness out
Okay.
and to help to engage like we're doing now.
Yeah.
This is to engage, to bring about awareness and understanding,
Mhm.
um, and possibly acceptance.
Yeah.
Acceptance might be difficult, but I think there are steps towards human growth
Mhm.
in these difficult situations. The
Yeah.
first step is awareness.
Yeah.
And I think Black History Month gives us that.
Yeah.
And awareness should lead to understanding,
Yeah.
and understanding, I think, should lead to appreciation,
Yeah.
you know, um, ultimately acceptance. Acceptance, not just that we are people like everybody else, but acceptance that blacks are going through a very difficult system that others should help open up,
Yeah.
to open up,
Yeah.
you know, and also that in challenges, that there are success stories.
Yes.
There are big success stories. Black History Month enables us to know that there have been black inventors, right?
Yeah.
Because we celebrate, that things we use on a daily basis, like the ironing board, traffic signals.
Yes.
All of these have been invented by black people, and we have come to learn of those who have made significant contributions to the advancement of black people under very difficult circumstances. Black History Month enables us to recall the contributions of people like the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X,
Mhm.
you know, Thurgood Marshall,
Mhm.
in look at what he did in terms of helping to open up. Rosa Parks challenging where
Mhm.
you sit on the bus. Today we can talk of Kamala Harris as Vice President of the United States. But it started way back with people like Shirley Chisholm, who
Yeah.
was the very first black person to run for president in this country. Civil rights people like John Lewis, sports personalities, entertainment personalities. There is there is something about being Black. And even in the midst of all this adversity, that people rise and do their best. Uh, they might have to work 3 times harder, 4 times harder, but they make the mark. That's part of what we celebrate with Black History Month, that in the midst of these challenges, in the midst of adversity and oppression, you know, there is still an opportunity to rise.
Yeah.
And that's why Maya Angelou's poem, "And Still I Rise," always elevates me, because in whatever context we find ourselves, we should always see that we have the opportunity to rise and rise and rise. And for me, this is important too, as well as um, acknowledging that things have not been equal, acknowledging that injustice exists, but also recognizing that there is another side to it. After all, we started this conversation about, the differences between what I have observed in the United Kingdom and the United States. I didn't see back then too many Black people in England in top positions. I didn't see that. I saw them as nurses.
Mhm.
I saw them as dustbin collectors. I saw them, in difficult frontline types of occupations. But in the United States, I have seen Black people as doctors, as lawyers, as
Mhm.
members of Congress, as members of the legislature, as generals in the army, as judges in the judiciary. It wasn't a cakewalk for them now,
Yeah.
but it seemed that in the midst of this struggle, there has been an opportunity for some people to rise.
Yeah.
And I think Black History Month enables us to celebrate the contribution of historical Black colleges and universities
Yeah.
that came into being, in order to help bring and deliver education to Blacks when it was difficult for them to attend other kinds of universities. So there is a mixed bag.
Yeah.
I didn't see historically Black colleges and universities in London. I didn't see one,
Yeah.
you know, but I saw here and a history that's like almost 200 years old.
Yeah. Um, there's so much that you said there, and there's so much to think about. And there are points in this conversation where I wanted to go off and talk about a whole variety of other things. Like when you were comparing colonialism in Africa with the history of slavery in America, and the way in which predominantly white cultures have subjugated in different ways people of other cultures, people of other colors. Um,
Yes.
that's a whole conversation for another time, perhaps. I also heard you saying that, that perhaps other people could make it easier for the Black experience in America. And there is some thought now about the idea that the job of dismantling white supremacy and racism is really a job that white people need to put energy and effort into, rather than just expecting Black people in America to push through it and overcome it. That there is a real work that we need to do to dismantle that. You were saying that in the middle of what you were sharing a second ago about perhaps other people could make it easier, and I think that's very
Well,
true.
yeah. And then maybe I put it in too crass a term there, but yes, I did say
No,
that. But what I
you
no,
were.
I know, I understand. I understand. There, if you take a look at the Black Lives Matter
Yeah.
and you take a look at the civil rights movement, they didn't wait for others to make it easier for them.
No.
They gave up sweat and treasure and blood and life to fight for it, to be able to bring it to the forefront. But at some point, because the guardians of our institutions come from the white dominant class, they too then have to be brought into this discussion.
Mhm.
And so you see the contributions to help break through those barriers that people like President Lyndon Johnson did.
Mhm.
You know, in some of the things he pushed through some very difficult times,
Yeah.
some very difficult times. But we needed that. We
Yeah.
needed that because on our own we can agitate, we can fight, we can draw attention. But those who are the guardians of white, I hate to use the word supremacy, but perhaps a white privilege, they too must become aware of the role that they are playing
Yeah.
in locking other people away from opportunity. And that's what I meant by that.
Thank you. Um, Gosh, I could carry on talking to you all evening, but I know we have to get to the rest of our evenings. There's also a whole other conversation at some other point I want to have about my short trip to Sierra Leone and Freetown that I made when I was the
Okay.
parish priest in London. And I've told you about that privately in the past, and we should
Yes.
talk about that at some
Right.
point and share with it.
Yes.
My treasurer in my parish in London was Peter Tucker from Freetown.
Right.
The son of a famous Peter Tucker there. And
That's
so
correct. Yes. That's
another
right. Yes.
conversation for
Uh,
another
uh,
time.
Absolutely. But you ran into some good family there. You know, the famous Peter Tucker, whose son you met,
Yeah,
you know, was head of the civil service in Sierra Leone, and so and played a critical role there in the transformation of our society. So
I was
plenty to talk about, I'm sure.
privileged to spend one lunchtime talking to him about the difference between parliamentary and presidential democracies, and trying to keep up with him. But that was a lovely opportunity. I'm so glad that you're in our community and that you are bringing your grace and presence to the worship at Trinity. And I'm grateful for this time and this conversation. I wish you every blessing in the rest of your evening.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share at any time. And I hope that I will continue to give up my best at Trinity Episcopal Cathedral, my spiritual home here in Sacramento.
Yeah. Well, Professor Emeritus Don Taylor, thank you for your time. God bless you.
Thank you very much, Dean Matthew Woodward.
There we go.
Thank you.
Take care, Don.
Thank you. And have a pleasant evening.